in his final year of the program. He holds his BA in both CMRS and English from the University of Saskatchewan, as well as an MA in English from the same. He's also a graduate of the Masters in Digital Humanities program at KU Leuven in Belgium. Kyle's research interests include textual editing, digital humanities, as well as classical influences on late medieval and Renaissance texts. His doctoral research is funded by a Shirk Joseph Armand Bombardier scholarship. And since this is a works in progress talk, it is a requirement of the PhD program in our department. But more importantly, it's a chance for up and coming scholars like Kyle to get feedback on his dissertation at this point. And so I too want to extend my thanks to all of you for joining us and for helping Kyle along the way. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Kyle.
Hey, thank you, Lindsay. So many people to thank. Diana Teagenkamp, thank you for organizing all of this administratively and running the sort of PR advertising side. Thank you, Ian and Lindsay, for organizing this on your respective CMRS and English department sides. And thank you, Brent, for those wonderful words about Peter. He is certainly missed. And we're so very grateful to be on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis, to be a part of these communities that create meaning with one another. I just wanted to say that it is an honor to participate in this colloquium. It was just about a decade now that I came to my first CMRS colloquium, which is kind of weird to think about. It was really the event that showed me what academia was about, right? It's this community gathered around common intellectual interests, all discussing a single topic from their own different perspectives in order to better explore and illuminate what one presenter had to say. And so, it's awesome to be here. I'm going to try and share my screen now, and hopefully that works. There, everybody's seeing hopefully just a big title shot. Yeah. So if I can just, there, perfect. Everything's working now. Sorry. So this talk is actually a part of a works in progress talk, as Lindsay mentioned. So I just thought I'd frame my dissertation topic a little bit for you. It grew out of reading some of the criticism on Donne's verse letters as I was actually looking for a text to edit, or a group of texts to edit. And what I came across kind of shocked me. I don't know if I was just sort of a naive new grad student and too optimistic, but I had assumed, it's John Donne. Everybody would love John Donne. I certainly did. And once I started reading some of the criticism on Donne's verse letters, I realized not everybody felt that way. Evelyn writes in 1668 that Donne falls short in his letters of the praises some give him. That's not such harsh criticism, although there's a scathing bent and tone. Grierson, who actually edited Donne's satires, epigrams, and verse epistles, says that this is on the whole the least attractive period of Donne's life and work. Foster says that Donne degenerated into a sycophant of various court favorites. And Thompson, who's perhaps the most aggressive, says that the desire to please brought out the worst in Donne, and that his verse letters have a note of falsity and strain that are neurotic and undignified. So some pretty scathing stuff from somebody who is generally accepted, as the monarch of wit, one of the great poets of the Renaissance. Of course, it wasn't all bad. Many scholars found value in Donne's verse letters and occasional poetry. Spence cites Pope as commending Donne's epistles, metempsychosis, and satires as his best. Grossart says that reading the verse letters the verse letters will abundantly recompense the most prolonged study. I don't know about a more encouraging endorsement for a dissertation topic. Sainsbury says that his verse letters show Donne's poetic powers at their ripest, so he does have some complaints about them. But I think beyond some of these value judgments, there were more compelling arguments, most notably from the likes of Margaret Maurer and Ted Pebworth and Claude J. Summers. Maurer writes that the interrelationship between these letters to noble women, that's the patronage epistles, and some of the funeral elegies describes a different situation from one of Donne indulging in reckless, indiscriminate praise. Pebworth and Summers say that fundamentally referential and occasional, the verse letter is necessarily rooted in external reality. Hence, full appreciation of any particular verse letter requires knowledge of the context from which it arises. And so their work really pointed towards the verse letters as texts for which productive readings depended highly upon different contexts. And this is when I started thinking of these poems in terms of a context of sociability, sort of broadly defined. And so my dissertation in its current state is the framing of Donne's verse letters and occasional poems in various contexts of sociability, trying to shed light on some of the relationships that are there. So for today, specifically, that's the common framework of Cicero, but also the readings implicit within manuscripts representative of particular social circles. That's the materiality chapter. And particular readings dependent upon personal relationships, which are things that people like Marr and Summers and Pebworth have already sort of explored somewhat. The final chapter, the idea is that it consists of a theoretical approach as to how one might construct a network edition, that is, a digital edition that uses network visualizations as an interface for a new method of computer-assisted reading as a means to present those poems in a way that emphasizes their social context. Of course, rather than try to pack all of this into the precious minutes we have left, I just want to talk about one example from the first chapter of the dissertation and some of the work that goes into that chapter's framing. And the central idea behind this chapter is that Cicero's Laelius de Amicitia, Laelius on friendship, along with his dream of Scipio, the Somnium Scipionis, both of which were integral texts for young men's education in Renaissance England, that they constitute a common rhetoric of friendship that Donne employs in several of his familiar and patronage verse epistles. So today I'm going to argue that Donne incorporates that rhetoric in his Elegy to the Lady Bedford, a sort of verse epistle elegy hybrid, as a unique way of employing that language of friendship that consoles his patron, Lucy, the Countess of Bedford, while elevating both Lucy and her departed friend, the Lady Markham, as a new model for exemplary friendship, an act that elevates Donne by extension. And just I want to take a moment now to point out that actually there is one scholar, Laurie Shannon, who talks about this elegy to the Lady Bedford in relation to De Amicitia, in a monograph in 2002 called Sovereign Amity. In fact, she's the first person, as far as I know, to talk about De Amicitia in relation to Donne's poems at all. But her focus is on their qualities as indicative of Renaissance ideas about gender and sovereignty, and it sort of overshadows a comprehensive treatment of these poems through the lens of Cicero's models as a means to look at friendship and Donne's own social context. She's really more interested in how models of personal friendship lead into an idea of personal politics in the following century. Just a few quick things on Donne. So I think a lot of people know that Donne was a poet and turned preacher, but he was also someone in an administrative role as a secretary to Thomas Egerton, the Lord Keeper. He was a soldier. He's also the most widely circulated poet in early 17th century manuscripts. And so he's very popular at the time. He also famously called friendship his second religion, which really means something for somebody who would eventually be preaching sermons at St. Paul's. So just to give a little bit of context about the time that this poem is written, it's 1609. Donne is out of work. He's actually been blackballed by his father-in-law for eloping with his now wife. And so part of his writing to his patroness, Lucy, Countess of Bedford, is that he's trying to curry political favor and hopefully translate that political favor into some sort of occupation. But before we get to that poem, we should talk a little bit about Cicero. And I'm not going to go too much into depth about precisely who Cicero was. I'm sure you've at least heard the name, right? He was a Roman senator and a novus homo, which essentially means he was the first Roman consul in his own family. And Roman consul, to put it simply, is the highest rank in the Roman Senate. But he's also the author of many influential works, like the ones I'll talk about today. But that also includes things like his letters, Cato on Old Age. He's got so many works. But a far more interesting, at least for this presentation, and difficult question is who Cicero was to his Renaissance readers, particularly to those like Donne who read Cicero within a particular program of study. And for those men and some privileged women who were personally tutored, the answer is that Cicero was the Latin author for the education of young men. And it's important to note that though Cicero adapts and sometimes even outright steals many of his ideas from Greek authors, he's the source of these ideas for most Renaissance readers. So what is this text? When we're talking about the Laelius de Amicitia, we're really talking about a relatively short tract on friendship in which the famous figure of Laelius Sapiens, or Laelius the Wise, is asked by his sons-in-law to comment on the nature of friendship immediately after the death of Laelius's best friend, Scipio Africanus the Younger. I won't get into it too much, but these characters are important. Scipio and Laelius are friends at the center of what's called the Scipionic Circle, a coterie from the early Roman Republic under Scipio's own patronage made up of generals, poets, playwrights, and philosophers who loved Greek culture. The group is emulated and mythologized by authors such as Cicero and even Horace, who paint them as ideal Roman citizens. Cicero uses Laelius and Scipio as a recurring cast in his works to lend authority to his writings. And there's a lot going on in this text, right? It's not just what I'm about to talk about today, but there are a few core principles of friendship here that are really relevant to Donne's elegy to the Lady Bedford that I want to walk you through. So the most prominent principle is that true friendship results in the doubling of oneself. Laelius tells us that a true friend is one who is just as another self, and that for one who looks upon a true friend, it is as though he looks upon a copy of himself. Paradoxically, such friends are not just independent reflections of one another. Cicero claims that man loves himself and seeks another so he might mingle the other's soul with his own to the point that he almost makes one from two. This is that sort of Aristotelian one soul embodies twain, the idea that two actually become one in addition to becoming independent reflections of one another. And these real friendships are rare. In fact, they're limited based on their intimacy, so that it can only occur among two or a select few, according to Laelius. And finally, and probably the most importantly for our purposes today, Laelius tells us that there's nothing more joyful than true friendship, that its rewards allow us to fend off death itself. He says, those absent become present in friendship, the poor become rich, the weak prevail, and even more difficult to say or believe, the dead survive. So great is the honor of those friends, so great their memory and desire that follows the dead, that the death of those departed seems blissful, and the lives of the others who remain are celebrated and honored. So Cicero provides this Stoic vision where virtue and honor is so shared among friends that the dead go on living so long as their friends remain alive and keep them in their memory. Scipio's dream then is the prequel. It's actually Scipio Africanus the Younger, is the person who was dead in the previous text. It's his dream vision where he ascends to the heavens, meets his deceased grandfather, also called Scipio Africanus, and incidentally also best friends with Laelius's grandfather, who is also called Laelius, which gets a little bit confusing. But Scipio the Younger also meets his deceased father Paulus there. And Paulus explains to Scipio that the soul's path of return to the eternal fires of the heavens, that is, the soul returns to the stars and planets after death. Paulus says in this text, a soul was given humans out of those eternal fires which you call sidera et stella, that is, the constellations and the stars, or the heavenly bodies. And the souls of those who die while devoted to virtue are let loose from the body and inhabit that place which your people have learnt from the Greeks to call orbem lacteum, the milky sphere, what we now call the Milky Way. Scipio's dream is primarily known for its cosmology of the universe, or rather its adaptation of the Ptolemaic cosmology of the universe. But Donne focuses instead on its heavenly image of the soul's return to the heavens in the elegy to the Lady Bedford. And so these texts have important similar themes, right, that are appropriate to the context of Donne's poem. They're both reflecting on death. One is written immediately after the death of the good friend Scipio. The other is actually Scipio's experience of traveling to where the soul resides after death and encountering his ancestors. But they're both discussing virtue. Laelius is talking about what it means to be virtuous in friendship, and Scipio is having a discussion about what it means to be virtuous in relation to the state. And then there's, of course, the common cast. Laelius and Scipio appear together in several texts in addition to these two. And so all of these things are tying these together, but also it gives Donne this opportunity. Donne he adapts the Ciceronian model of friendship, usually reserved only for good men, to Lucy and her departed friend, most likely the Lady Markham. He synthesizes that model with the understanding of the virtuous soul's transcendence after death in Scipio's dream to console Lucy by reaffirming her virtue and legitimizing her friendship as exemplary. I just wanted to give a quick note on Lucy Russell, the Countess of Bedford. So she was very likely well educated, though it's really difficult to pin down how well educated, and that's part of the time period is women's education tended to be part of an independent program of study, whereas someone like Donne was part of a much larger program. But she was definitely the patroness of many notable poets, including Donne and Johnson. And certainly a picture of her life gives the idea of a politically active, independent woman. My favorite story about Lucy, Countess of Bedford, is that she allegedly raced north to Scotland, skipping Queen Elizabeth's funeral in order to preemptively gain an audience with the new monarchs. And it seems to be a task that actually worked, as she quickly became one of Queen Anne's favorites. The poem I'm about to talk about, the Elegy to the Lady Bedford, is written around 1609, as I mentioned before. And it's an occasional poem after the death of Lucy's dear friend, the Lady Markham. So I think I was actually going to look up here like we were in some kind of actual room. When reading this poem, I think what we'll do is I'll come back and let this poem sit as a slide when we're taking questions, maybe, if we can do that. But for now, I'm just going to read a few key passages for the sake of time. So Donne begins this poem with the conceit that Lucy and her friend are doubles of one another. So he writes, "You that are she, and you that's double she, in her dead face half of yourself shall see. She was the other part, for so they do, which build them friendships, become one of two." So Donne begins with this conceit that friends are doubles of one another, and this establishes one of the core Ciceronian principles of friendship, of course, and the conceit for the rest of the poem. It identifies Lucy and the Lady Markham as true friends. But it actually has another important function in this poem. Now, every compliment that Donne pays in the poem can be doubly read, right? It's praise for both the surviving friend and the one who has passed. And so it kind of bypasses some of the problems with that sycophantic flattery, as Foster would talk about it. Donne then notes, right, in lines 4 and 5, that they who build them friendships become one of two, so two that but themselves no third can fit. Which, if you'll recall, actually goes above and beyond the intimacy of the model that Laelius sets out. Donne says it's not two or some few. These two are so close, they are so intimate that a third cannot fit. So he actually makes them exemplars above and beyond what Cicero is setting out. Furthermore, jumping to line 20, Lucy is now all what both was before. And not just all as in she's all that left, or as Donne tells us, as if some perished by this, but because in Lucy all contracted is. The Lady Markham, or at least all that was worth something that was within her, still lives. Then, starting at line 27, we have, "So, madam, as her soul to heaven is fled, her flesh rests in the earth as in a bed. Her virtues do as to their proper sphere, return to dwell with you, of whom they were." The Lady Markham's flesh is in the earth. Her soul is fled to heaven, possibly an allusion to Scipio's dream, along with the notion of the ladies as diverse stars of one constellation in line 8. But her virtues return to dwell in Lucy, whose virtue it was all along, as is proper in true friendship. Donne then carries on a protracted metaphor of alchemy before advising Lucy that she might search for some replacement in line 39. Possibly in her books, but there, none but the biblical Judith might match the departed. And the allusion to Judith is actually really intriguing. We know the Lady Markham was a widow, just like the biblical Judith. And just a quick recap of who Judith is, right? So Israel is under attack, and one of the towns is sort of holding out in a siege, preventing the enemy army from getting into the rest of Israel. And the Israelites there are ready to capitulate, and Judith kind of just says no. She goes out with only her handmaiden and seduces the enemy general Holofernes, gets him drunk, and then decapitates him before heading back into the city with his head. So there's something a little more suggestive here, right? The idea is that Lady Markham, and by extension, Lucy, are these fierce women, right? These independent and powerful individuals who can overcome the aggression and trappings of this male society to do great things. So what is Donne doing with this? Well, this is a time when Montaigne, in his own tract on friendship, says that friendship is a knot too fast and too tight for women. It's a time when poets like Johnson are writing pieces such as the epigram to the Court Pucelle, which is an attack on Lucy's own cousin that paints the female patron as a kind of prostitute, a move fueled by Johnson's own frustrations with the power women had gained through their patronage system. Donne, instead, gives us a radically different image. I kind of just want to let that sit for half a second because it's such a wonderful painting, and this is viscerally different from what you might expect from someone of the time. I think it's also interesting that so this painting is done probably within 5 years of the same poem, and it's one of the only paintings of Judith done by a woman at that time, and it's much more active than these other versions. But Donne says, forget those other guys. You're the model for true friendship. He even says outright in another poem on Lady Markham's death that she reformed this forward heresy, that women can no parts of friendship be. And Donne's motives, they obviously aren't altruistic, right? He's not just trying to elevate women as a new model for friends. There's a bit of a catch. He frames Lucy and the Lady Markham as the new model of friendship, right? It's not just about flattery. They're a new Laelius and Scipio. But the interesting thing about that is that Donne's counterpart, he then becomes clear. Much as Cicero gains virtue by describing the terms of the friendship between Laelius and Scipio, Donne elevates himself through elevating Lucy and Lady Markham, becoming the Cicero to this new exemplary model of true friendship. And as everyone in this room can probably attest, we remember the name of Cicero far more readily than the names of those he wrote about. And so too, it seems, has become the case with Donne. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to take questions.